Welcome to this special launch event for Humanist Climate Action. I'm Professor Alice Roberts, I'm President of Humanists UK, and I'm delighted to be hosting this inaugural event. And I'm so pleased that so many of you have chosen to join us tonight. We think there are about 500 people here with us. The effects of human-mediated climate change are now visible, noticeable, staring us in the face. From the increased frequency of tropical storms to retreating ice sheets, from the Australian wildfires, which killed an estimated 3 billion vertebrates last year, to heat waves, which pose real danger to human lives. Humans have caused this, and humans need to do something about it. Climate change is undoubtedly the biggest challenge that's facing us this century, and our response to it will require us to flex those human capabilities that humanists most value: rational thinking and ingenuity, but also empathy and cooperation. Humanists look to science as the best method that we've got for understanding the world around us and for informing our response to challenges. We see how human lives are enriched by interactions with the rest of the natural world. And I say the rest of because we humans are part of nature, not separate from it. And we know that there are no higher powers that will help us to meet this challenge. No deity is going to intervene, we can be fairly sure, as when we've faced crises before, we've never seen anything that looks remotely like divine intervention. So we can forget ideas of supernatural powers or beings. The world is a natural place, and the responsibility is ours to protect our own lives, those of others, and indeed of the whole planet. Surveys have shown that humanists are more concerned about climate change than the rest of the population. And now a founding group of humanists, including the moral philosopher and former Vice President of Humanists UK, Richard Norman, have come together to launch this new volunteer-led Humanists Climate Action. Richard has written, Humanist Climate Action seeks to bring humanist values and beliefs to the movement tackling environmental degradation, such as rising global temperatures, species loss, biodiversity decline, and the destruction of the natural environment. We aim to make our own distinctive contribution. We do not duplicate the work of other campaigns and organisations, but cooperate with them, including through our membership of the Climate Coalition. We aim to raise awareness, encouraging our fellow humanists to take action and to add their voices to this shared human endeavour. And so I really am delighted to see so many people joining us for this launch event tonight. We're here to talk about climate change, the challenge and possible solutions. And with me to do that is a glittering panel of experts: Professor Sarah Bridle, Professor Ben Garrod, Dr. Anjana Khatwa, and Mr. Mark Linus. We hope this will be a very interactive discussion, and I'd like to invite you all to send us your questions using the Q&A box, which I hope you can all see and click on so that you can open it and send those questions in, and we'll try to discuss as many of them as we can this evening. So now for some proper introductions to the panel before we launch into those questions. First of all, I want to introduce Sarah Bridle. She is a professor in the School of Physics and Astronomy at the University of Manchester. She's published more than 100 refereed publications, and most of her work so far has focused on trying to uncover the nature of dark energy. But Sarah has diversified to apply her cosmology expertise to agriculture and food research. So she leads a project called Take a Bite Out of Climate Change, which aims to engage the public with the scientific consensus on food and climate change. And her book with that title, Food and Climate Change Without the Hot Air, was published just last September. Sarah, what are you focusing on right now?
Oh, well, thanks so much for inviting me. Having spent the last 20 years doing astrophysics research and data science, I had an epiphany about 5 years ago that, my kids started at school and I started to picture them saying to me in 20 years' time, what did you do about climate change, mummy? And me saying, I looked at the stars and thinking, I can't really handle that. So I'm really focusing on understanding the impact of different types of foods on climate change. Just to give a bit of context for why this is so important. I'm sure nobody needs reminding here that climate change is happening. It's a beautiful illustration here of climate stripes. If you Google that, you can also buy the merchandise. I'm not behind any of this, but actually this was produced by a former astrophysicist, Ed Hawkins. And but if we look at climate change and the causes of climate change, I started to look into that and found that about a quarter of all climate change comes from food. So that's clearing land for agriculture, fertilizers on the soil, rearing animals, growing food for animals, and transportation, packaging, cooking and food waste, all of these things it takes to produce food. Now, we clearly need to do something about that 75%, about the green part of this pie chart. We need to stop burning fossil fuels. But when we do that, food will be the biggest cause of climate change, because most of the food impacts on climate change don't involve fossil fuels. Now, I'm not going to test you whether you can figure out which do you think causes more climate change out of this steak or the microwave potato and beans. But what's really interesting is that different foods cause very different amounts of climate change. And that's actually a good thing, because if all food contributed about the same to climate change, then we'd have a problem, because we need to eat. But if we compare these two things, so an 8-ounce steak and chips or a microwave potato and beans, can you guess how different those climate impacts would be? And most people are surprised at the size of the difference. So for an average European produced steak and chips, that would cause about 20 times the climate impact of this microwave potato and beans. Now, I'm not suggesting that we should all stop eating meat or beef and only eat beans and potatoes. It's just one example of how different foods contribute differently to climate change. But there's also different ways of producing foods and how they contribute differently. So there's a huge range. For example, beef here, it could be 10 times if it was a really well-produced beef, or 100 times if it was produced in a place with deforestation. And so what I'm passionate about is having a national conversation or a global conversation about how we change the food system. Because if we don't stop burning fossil fuels, we're going to have to change the food system anyway, because of the climate impacts on food itself due to climate change. So something's got to change in the next 10 years, basically, in terms of the food that we eat. But without information, then that conversation is not so productive. We need information about the climate impacts of different foods, and to really incentivize and reward the fantastic things that food producers are already doing. So that's what I'm kind of obsessed about at the moment. Thanks, Alice.
Thank you very much indeed, Sarah. And I'm sure we'll be focusing on food quite a bit in our discussion. We've already got some questions coming in, so that's great. Keep them coming in. I can see them in the Q&A box, and we will share those with the panel once we've met the rest of them. I'm moving on now to introduce Professor Ben Garrod. Ben is Professor of Evolutionary Biology and Science Engagement at the University of East Anglia in Norwich. He's a biologist with a keen interest in evolution, in wild animal behaviour and conservation. His PhD, which looked at monkey evolution on tropical islands, was entitled "What Else? Primates of the Caribbean." He's also a broadcaster and an author. You might have seen his baby chimp rescue recently on BBC Two, and his series on the secrets of skin and secrets of bones over on BBC Four. He's also the author of many books on extinct creatures, books on dinosaurs. My children have them all. I've got some of them right here. They're absolutely brilliant if you've got primary age children, probably just into secondary age as well. And he's just about to launch a new series of books called Extinct. And in fact, the first books in that series are released today. So it's publication day for Ben. Ben, could you tell us a bit more about your work, and also what you think might be the biggest challenge amongst all the challenges that are facing us with regard to climate change?
Thanks, Alice, and thank you for the plug, as always. Yeah, it's been a very busy day so far. What I'm up to right now. So I guess I spend most of my time at the moment teaching. So like you and like many other academics, I've been virtual teaching over the last year. And now, it's been never more important than what we're doing now, and teaching the new generation of scientists, of engineers, of anyone involved within the STEM industry and other areas as well, to become empowered. And that kind of links me on to what you also asked, is what the biggest problem is. It's empowerment. How do we empower people and give them the knowledge, the skills, the weaponry in terms of the ability to communicate, the knowledge, the understanding, those communication techniques? How do we empower every single one of us listening today, as well as every child, as well as every government minister, everyone who works on a factory line or in a boardroom? How do we empower those to change, and how do we get those to want to make that difference? I've already seen one of the questions from Angela, which I know we'll talk about later, is I just feel like I can't do enough, I'm just one person. How do we change that narrative? There are 7.5 billion or so individual people on the planet, and if they all felt like that, then maybe we can make a difference. So it's, again, on a literal level, I do a lot of teaching with students of all ages. I guess my overarching objective is to work with people and empower them to care about the natural world, to care about the changes we're seeing around us, and to feel that they can make a difference, because they all can.
Thank you very much, Ben, for starting us off on that very positive note as well. And the next member of the panel that I would like to introduce is Dr. Anjana Khatwa. She's an earth scientist specialising in bringing stories about the origins and formation of natural landscapes to life for a wide range of audiences. She's a regular expert contributor on many natural history programmes, and she has a highly regarded international reputation as an expert on earth science and World Heritage education. She's published numerous papers on glacial geology and has developed award-winning teaching resources. She won the Royal Geographical Society Award for Excellence in Educating the Public about the Jurassic Coast, and later this year, she'll be awarded the R.H. Worth Medal from the Geological Society. So congratulations on that imminent award, Anjana. And please, can you tell us a bit more about your work, and particularly how you're focusing on engaging communities and looking at diversity when it comes to climate change?
Thanks, Alice. I'm just going to share a slide with you just to illustrate that point, take you back. My journey with natural landscapes began here, and I'm really passionate about geology. I'm passionate about what rocks and fossils can tell us about the history and the evolution of Earth, because climate change isn't a new science. Climate's been changing for billions of years, and the fossils and the rocks can tell us that. For someone like me who's of South Asian origin, heritage, going into natural landscapes isn't natural, if you like. A lot of Black and Asian and minority ethnic communities live in urban spaces. When we do go out to natural spaces, particularly in the United Kingdom, quite often we're made to feel like we don't belong, that we aren't welcome there. And there are two pictures here from my childhood. One is on the Isle of Wight, and just look at those rocks, they're amazing. The other picture is me and my family over at Hayling Island. In both examples, and one is from the 1990s, one is from 1987. In both examples, we experienced racism, we experienced horrendous comments and behaviour from people that we met when we were on holiday there. What does that lead to? That leads to a disparity of experiences that Black and Asian and diverse people feel when they go to natural spaces. And this means that quite often people like myself are quite scared to go into nature. So what is the impact of that? Essentially, what it means is that if you don't have a childhood connection with nature, with what it can offer you, you're divorced from it. You can't value it. And most recently, in the Nature Geoscience paper that I was a co-author on, we looked at the result of that disconnection of nature with children and young people, particularly from diverse backgrounds. You can see the data here. So this is the geosciences. And what's really interesting is when you look at who moves into the science of climate change, who's doing that research, actually, it's mostly white people. And why is that? Because at that early stage, we're disparate from nature. We don't have that connection. And we look at the data here. So physical geography, you have 7.5% of graduates there from Black and Asian backgrounds. And then when you look across the strands of the different sciences, you can see that diverse voices, they're not there. And the problem is that when you do fight the barriers and you do enter the spaces, sometimes that space doesn't always welcome you. And why does this matter? You might think, well, you know, does it matter? Science is science. Actually, when you bring a diverse voice into that scientific field, you get a different view and a different aspect and perspective of what that science means for global populations. And this is particularly significant because we know that it will be the populations of the global south that will be subject to probably some of the most harshest conditions due to climate change. So one of the key things that I want to talk about is some of the really powerful voices in the UK at the moment that are really championing that voice for the future, because ultimately it's young people that will have to face this uncertain future with what's happening in terms of climate change. Here are a really great selection of people to follow on Twitter and Instagram. And Bird Girl UK, so this is Maya Rose Craig, somebody who I hugely admire. She's standing at the Arctic with Greenpeace. She went a couple of months ago, and she did the first climate strike for schools in the Northern Arctic anywhere in the world. And I admire her resilience, her passion, and her drive to diversify the voice of the conservation movement. She's a phenomenal person to follow. Zakia, she writes about forests and how forests can be nurturing towards people. But essentially, all of these people here, they are showing diverse communities that they have a space and a voice within the natural heritage sector, that they belong, that their voices matter when it comes to climate change. And essentially, we have to look towards these young people and diverse influencers to work within their communities that are diverse, to look towards changing behaviour, leading to positive actions that can challenge how we are living today in terms of the future. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Anjana, and thank you for raising the profile of those particular individuals as well. I hope that there's lots of people who are watching tonight and who are immediately following those fantastic people. And we'll talk more about issues around diversity and stereotypes and ghettoising later, I'm sure. Thank you very, very much for that introduction to your work. Last but not at all least, we have Mark Lynas on the panel. Mark and I met each other quite a long time ago on the deck of a boat talking about wind power back in 2005, we think it was. And Mark, you just published your impactful book on climate change, High Tide, back then. You've been very, very busy since that point. Your most recent publication in June last year was Our Final Warning, 6 Degrees of Climate Emergency. And this is an entirely new update of the original 2007 book, 6 Degrees, for which Mark won the prestigious Royal Society Science Books Prize. Congratulations on that award, Mark. So Mark also advises former Maldives President Mohamed Nasheed on climate and works with the 48-member Climate Vulnerable Forum in his capacity as well. He is currently a visiting fellow with the Cornell Alliance for Science at Cornell University, which engages in pro-science advocacy and research around the world on issues ranging from GMOs to vaccines to climate. Mark, I wanted to ask you how you became an environmental campaigner, but also how things have changed over recent decades, and also whether you're broadly optimistic about the way things are going.
Thanks for that, Alice, and thanks for the very, very kind introduction, and it's great to be here. And before I start and before I answer your question, I actually want to just take a minute to think about President Nasheed. He was targeted in an assassination attempt last Thursday. I don't know whether you heard about that on the news, but there was a bomb that was set off probably by Islamic radicals in the capital of the Maldives, Male, and President Nasheed was critically injured and has been in surgery since that time and is currently being airlifted to Germany to hopefully begin what will no doubt be a very long recovery process. But it was obviously really kind of shook us all up because we thought for a terrible moment that that we might have lost him. And I don't know, it just kind of highlighted for me how real this is. President Nasheed's somebody who's, I've written books and stuff, right? He's somebody who's put his life on the line in so many different ways. He's the person who did more than anyone to bring democracy to the Maldives. This was a country that was under a 30-odd year dictatorship up until the first democratic elections in 2007, which he won. But before that time, he'd been tortured, been in solitary confinement, spent years and years in jail. And so, yeah, he asked me to be his advisor in 2009, and we did the Copenhagen Climate Change Conference and tried to really make some noise there to raise the global awareness of the plight of small island states. But then there was a coup, and he was ejected from power in 2012 at the point of a gun, basically, and sent back to jail. Managed to get into exile in the UK. And then there was finally managed to restore democracy to the Maldives, and he's now Speaker of Parliament, so kind of the second most powerful person in the country. But the reason he was targeted by probably the Islamic radicals is because he stands for moderation. He's a voice for tolerance, he's a voice for democracy, and against the kinds of extremes that have caused so much damage in the world already. So he's a real ally, and he's somebody who's been a champion of climate change, and in a way which I think few people can match. And his work with the Climate Vulnerable Forum, which I'm also helping with, is essentially trying to bring the voice of the most vulnerable countries in the developing world more firmly onto the global agenda. So the CVF, the Climate Vulnerable Forum, was really the force which brought 1.5 degree goal back into what then became the Paris Agreement. So they've already achieved a huge amount, but it's still a long battle ahead. The latest pledges by all the different countries around the world. I think the US just increased its pledge at the Biden Climate Change Summit. Add all that together, we're still heading for a kind of 2.4 degrees is the most recent projection. But within my 6 degrees book, that's still the 3 degrees world, and that's still a world of mass extinction, extending droughts, major humanitarian crisis, and obviously for the planet's biology, a complete catastrophe. We lose 99% of the world's coral reefs, even before 2 degrees. So it's, oddly enough, though, I mean, to go back to your beginning of your question, you asked how I got into this. I started off as an activist doing kind of grassroots activism, sitting up trees, stopping bulldozers, road protests, that kind of thing. Then I went off to write this book, and I met you, I think, just after High Tide had been published. And believe it or not, that was fairly unique at the time, going around the world and looking at the impacts of climate change. I mean, it's completely standard now for all journalism on climate to do that. But at the time, it was pioneering, believe it or not. But I was very pessimistic for a long time because it seemed that few people were listening. Whenever I did a debate on the media, there was always some climate skeptic who I had to debate with about whether climate change was even real or not. It seemed like the fossil fuel industry was just too powerful, and that we would never be able to defeat these vested interests. Fast forward 20 odd years to where we are now, and I'm actually much more optimistic. So I really feel that we're on the cusp of a global transformation where we will exit fossil fuels more quickly and hopefully more cheaply than anyone imagined, certainly more than I imagined. I thought we'd be still fighting this battle towards the end of the 21st century. Actually, I do think now we have a realistic prospect of net zero at 2050, if not earlier, and that this sort of tipping point, there's now a real sense of momentum where the world will be exiting from fossil fuels much more rapidly than any of us thought possible. And there's a lot of other stuff as well, as Sarah mentioned, about dietary change. We need to deal with food, we need to deal with steel production, cement. There's lots of other bits and pieces. But basically, if we can get rid of fossil fuels, get rid of coal, leave oil and gas in the ground, and make that transition within the next 20 years, then we've got a good chance of a half-decent 21st century where we can actually protect and even begin to restore some of the ecological habitats and try to stop biodiversity loss at the same time.
Thank you very much, Mark, and grounds for optimism there, even as we're facing this crisis. I do think it's interesting, particularly how the transition to renewable energy has taken off. And I think that perhaps back in 2005, we wouldn't have anticipated quite how far we would have come by now. Would you agree with that?
No, I mean, we were on a boat. If I remember right, this was when you were doing that that series called Coast, right? And we were on a boat in an offshore wind farm somewhere off the coast of North Wales near Rhyl, and it felt like we were seeing something quite extraordinary. I mean, these things had only just gone up. Now they're all over the UK coast. Solar power was phenomenally expensive. No one could afford to even use solar panels back then. Now it's the cheapest form of electricity. I can imagine, India, a huge market, putting in, I think their target's for like 400 gigawatts. Just imagine how many solar panels that is, because it's the cheapest thing. They don't have to build all this coal after all, which is what we're all so fearful of. So the transition to a largely renewable economy, or certainly a zero carbon economy, I think is well underway.
That is fantastic to hear. We've got lots and lots of questions coming in from the audience tonight. Do keep them coming. So we're going to start with some of those now. And I'm going to start with a question that came in from Angela Evans-Hill, which actually is the question that you picked up on, Ben, and you saw that in the Q&A as it came in. And it is about how much of a difference an individual can make. So Angela says, can all of us making tiny changes really make a difference, given the problems caused by large industry? I'm doing what I can, she says, but sometimes it does seem too little. Can we kind of pit ourselves as individuals against mega corporations? I don't know. Sarah, would you like to take that one first?
Well, certainly in terms of food, I mean, I'm often in meetings where we're asked the question, who has the power? Is it the governments or the food producers or the individuals, citizens? And I'm not all, quite often I'm in the minority when I say I think it's the citizens that have the power. And the reason why I say that is because you look at plastics and you look at what happened in the last few years, and you saw that actually now, supermarkets, food producers, even, politicians are falling over themselves to, show off their wonderful policies on plastics. And that came from individuals. Now, that's different to all the individuals changing their diets, isn't it? So I guess like if we're expecting everybody to individually choose different foods, or individually insulate their homes or stop commuting or whatever, then that's really quite hard to expect the majority of people to do that. It's just not going to happen. And actually what the research on obesity shows is that providing more information doesn't change behavior, but it does change receptiveness to changes in the system and changes in policy. And you think of how toxic it is to talk about new policies around food, like sugar tax, for example. It's quite difficult to bring in those policies, but by having more information, we then need to drive that enthusiasm for changes in the system.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. And we've seen big impactful changes in other areas of human health that have worked in that way too. Particularly, I remember it was so deeply unpopular when the British Heart Foundation was pushing for banning smoking in public places, banning cigarette dispensing machines in pubs. But there was a big campaign to bring people along with that, and it's been so massively successful in terms of public health. So yeah, I think you're absolutely spot on. What about other panelists then? I mean, how do you feel about your own kind of individual responsibility and how much of an impact you really can have as an individual? Anjana?
Yeah, I thought I'd say something, because I think this is fascinating, because I think for a lot of diverse communities, they rely on somebody taking that leap first. And then what happens is it happens by word of mouth, and then the momentum builds and you get the action happening, if you like. And that for diverse communities, it's a slightly different approach. There is a genuine lack of trust with, I would say, with science, with nature, with natural heritage, because there just isn't that familiarity there. So where we can build in folks within the community who can actually, speak in the right language, deliver it in an appropriate way, then you begin to build that allyship and that connection with nature. And then we can begin to see changes, like, for example, reducing reliance on plastic, and perhaps, adopting different changes to diet, as you've suggested, Sarah. So, what's really interesting is that, communities that were moving here as immigrants in 30 years ago, like my own parents, we were very reliant on, growing our own food and growing our own vegetables and relying on smallholders, because the foods that we needed to create our, indigenous dishes, you couldn't get those at the supermarket. And then suddenly, Tesco now sells coriander. So it's almost like 30 years ago, my parents were living in a sustainable way, but we've kind of moved away from that because that is the gross commercialization of produce and food and products. And what was really interesting, I saw something on Twitter last week that ASOS, the fast fashion clothing manufacturer, they put an advert out saying, oh, we are now producing, Asian bridal wear, which is fast fashion. But what that does is that goodness knows where it's shipped from, the carbon emissions related to that. Normally, Asian communities would go to their local, shop or their dressmaker to have something made bespoke, which is smaller, which supports local communities, which is more sustainable. So in terms of diverse communities, we are always, going back to our roots, because we are very suspicious of that global approach to kind of, if you like, appropriate our culture and our heritage. Does that make sense? So we have a slightly different approach to engage us.
Thank you, Anjana. Mark, how do you feel about individual responsibility? And do you feel that that really it's very, very difficult to resist big corporations? I mean, we might be able to lobby our MPs, we might be able to vote for particular parties which we think are going to put green issues high up on the agenda, but we have these massive global corporations. How do we hold them to account? How do we make them change?
Well, I mean, climate change is a collective action problem. So that means that working as an atomized individual is fairly trivial, unless you can come together and make your voice heard in a more, in a stronger way and collectively. So that makes it inherently political. And, we've got a net zero target in the UK now, which is legally binding. The government has passed legislation which means that there won't be anyone selling petrol and diesel cars after 2030. This stuff doesn't come around in a political vacuum. It comes around because you've had the school strikers in the streets, you've had Extinction Rebellion, you've had really strong political momentum demanding that there be a legally binding climate change system which takes us where we need to go, and which gets stronger and stronger as the political momentum grows. So I think that's the way around to look at it. And by the way, corporations have to be bound by that as well. And when there's enough momentum, they are falling over themselves to show how green they are. And you've now got banks divesting from fossil fuels, making sure that none of the financial institutions are still lending money for new coal projects and so on and so forth. So when that transition has begun, nobody wants to be left behind, and you have a more kind of positive direction of travel rather than everyone just waiting for someone else to act. But the origin of that is political action, often street level action by informed citizens.
Thank you very much. I thought it was quite interesting, the recent news today about Tesla saying that they're not going to accept Bitcoin anymore for environmental reasons. And that's kind of big corporations holding each other to account as well, which is quite interesting. Ben, how do you feel about your own kind of individual impact on this crisis?
I think everyone's hit the nail on the head really well so far, but I think it's worth saying on top of that, we have to believe we can make a difference. We genuinely have to all be on board with that. And it's very cliche to say, but Avalanche is made up of hundreds of millions of trillions of individuals again. So yes, an individual can often seem like a whisper in the dark, but actually if enough people are joining in, as Mark said, it's this force of numbers has this massive knock-on effect. And ultimately we vote for our politicians. We are the consumers in terms of shops. So you all know this, everyone sat there watching, but 50% of the stuff in your kitchens and your bathrooms, the products you regularly buy from supermarkets have unsustainable palm oil in. We know that. Do we check? It's up to us. It's up to us to have to stand on our feet and go, right, I will make that difference. I will shop and walk the shops. I will shop in a better, more ethical way as a consumer. I will vote for that group who, yes, want to make my street safer, but also want to commit to the future of the planet there. So it's up to us, and we can make a difference. But in that same vein, the other very common question I get, and I'm sure everybody else hears, is, but they're worse than us. So we hear whether it's a corporation or whether we hear it's America or China. Yeah, they are, but we just have to get in it together. This isn't something that's going to affect just the Chinese or the Americans. There's one big cloud of icy storm surge that's going to avoid the UK. And I'm not saying we're thinking that, but this is very much this NIMBYism that we quite naturally have as a species. I'm not doing terrible things, so why should I do more so? We all have to. This is something that's not going to affect us for the rest of our lives. This is something that's going to affect us for the rest of our lives and our kids' lives and our grandkids' lives, regardless of what we do. It's just how we address that and what level of impact we can make right now.
Thank you, Ben. And I think it's interesting that we are here tonight at the launch of Humanist Climate Action, because we talked a bit there about the importance of collective effort, about the fact that we are all individuals, but it's when we come together that we can make changes. So thank you very much for that question, Angela. We've got a question now from Peter Gaskin, which is about narratives. He says, empowerment is absolutely necessary, but choice on such matters to many matters creates a huge pressure on individuals, many of whom won't have the resources to make the best choices, which can feel demotivating and overwhelming. We really need to change the narrative to help politicians and industry make better choices, but only if we bring people along, i.e. make the issue relevant to all lives. Does everyone agree of the need for macro change and to bring people along with the good narrative? And how can it be achieved? So, we were kind of talking about that change in narrative in that previous discussion. So let's move it along now to talking about how we can achieve it. Who would like to start with that one then? Ben.
I think you'll know this, Alice, more than nearly any of us, that if you try and get something on the TV, for example, that's conservation or environmental or climate change, up till very recently, you might as well have it. It was like the adult version of saying Voldemort in bloody Harry Potter. It was the thing that must not be mentioned, because the narrative was wrong, because it was doom and gloom. And I can remember sitting on my uncle's knee when I was a kid in the early 80s, watching this terrible documentary. I loved Wales, absolutely loved Wales, the place, but also the animals. These poor animals being speared and killed and harpooned, and that was a conservation program. I remember as a kid thinking, God, conservation's awful. It's just the most nasty, terrible thing to get involved with. It's soul destroying. And it's not, but it's the narrative that we've had has always been very much the stick rather than the carrot. And I think what I'm hoping all that the panelists will agree to is that we're seeing a much better narrative now, much more empowering, more positive, that it's not the doom and gloom, it's you can make a difference. And it's almost the Attenborough effect. It's going to look at the beauty of what we can save and the differences we can make, rather than the ecological wasteland that is out there. And that's not to shy away or to Disneyfy it and say, everything's fine, don't look at the crap that's going on over there. But equally, this is what you can achieve. This is the difference that you can make. Because it's a far more impressive driver, an incentivizer, than saying we've done a really shit job so far, so hey ho.
I think the role of media is fascinating in this, Ben, because we've seen the impact of programs and series, and particularly when we're thinking about plastic in the oceans. But there was a massive impact there from natural history programming from the BBC. But as you said, there'd been an absence of that for a very long time, and a very deliberate absence of including anything about conservation in, or any kind of challenges in those natural history programs. So we were just meant to look at the lives of those animals and not think about the context any more widely. And it was almost as though society had to be ready for that kind of question, or ready for that challenge. For these big programmers to actually do something like that, because obviously the team in Southampton that have been doing all that amazing research on plastic in the oceans, that's been going for decades. Groups like Surfers Against Sewage have been saying this for decades, and it seems to be that once society has kind of moved far enough along, then television will finally go, okay, we'll start talking about it as well. I don't know, do you think that's a frustration, Mark? Do you think that we should be looking to our media to be a bit more pioneering, as you were in your in High Tide, rather than following the curve?
It's interesting, but I think the narrative has shifted a long way. I mean, if you look at Seaspiracy, you know, that was viral on Netflix, and the first people who were watching it was my kids and everyone, and all the other kids at school, and they were turning around to us adults and saying, "Are you still eating fish from the ocean, by the way?" And we're like, no, I wouldn't dream of it. No. So we've all had to give up fish, which probably needed to happen. And actually, if I think about it philosophically, yes, we should give the oceans a break, and yes, we should stop all trawling and all industrial fishing, and stop, you know, destroying those ecosystems. And there was a kind of moral clarity in that film, which was really, really effective, which kind of blew away all of the old conservation NGO type guff and all of the labeling schemes and and it somehow was, there was kind of a novelty there, which I thought was really, really interesting in terms of how it appealed to a younger audience. And I don't know, I think like if you look at rewilding, which is another really positive narrative, which has become sort of a much bigger part of the kind of biodiversity conservation picture. It's like letting nature return over a large area. I mean, I'm looking out the window here. I'm on the Herefordshire Welsh border near Hay on Wye. It all looks very pretty, but most of these landscapes are wrecked by livestock. You know, large areas of the western half of the United Kingdom should be rainforest, but it's not. It's completely deforested and denuded because we've got livestock for people to eat meat. And actually, well, we should probably not be eating meat, and we should probably let these ecosystems come back, and then the biodiversity come back with them. And actually, even though that sounds a bit sacrificial, it's actually a very positive narrative, particularly given the technology change. We've got the Impossible Burger, we've got all sorts of substitutes. You know, I'm telling you, Oatly Barista is a lot better than cow's milk for your morning latte. All of this stuff. So it's now much easier, I think, to have a plant-based diet and to move towards, you know, an aim of zero meat, zero pollution, zero carbon, this kind of stuff, than it was before the technological substitutes existed. So that's another positive thing, is it's much easier and actually more fun and more rewarding in many ways to do the things which the environment needs us to do.
Thank you very much. And I'm gonna pick up on another question now, which really kind of feeds into this, which is about food. So Sarah, you'll be interested in this one as well. And it is about the role of eating meat in our diets. It's from Emily Lewis. She says, "I went vegan during the Humanist Lives Future Learn course." Excellent. That's a very good outcome of that course. "It made me think about the impacts of my choices, and I decided I don't want beings who evolved like humans to feel pain and have social connections to be raised for the purpose of my consumption. I shouldn't have that power. And our current use of animals also seems to tie in with Christian ideas about dominion over living things, which I don't identify with, especially in this time of impending ecological disaster. Could any of the speakers talk about a rational approach to veganism?" So Sarah, is this the direction we're headed in as a society? Are we all going to be vegan before? We're all going to be driving electric cars before we know it. Are we going to be vegan before we know it?
Well, I mean, in terms of just thinking about the climate impacts alone, then, I mean, all food contributes to climate change. And, you know, it really, from my point of view, the quantities are more important than being absolutist. You know, if you have a drop of milk in something, it's not going to, you know, completely change your carbon footprint from your food. So I'm not sure how helpful the vegan narrative is in reducing massively animal product consumption. However, it is true that, you know, generally speaking, animal-based products cause more climate impact, you know, per whatever nutrition or weight than plant-based products. It is possible to be a vegan and cause a lot of climate change from food by, you know, eating air-freighted vegetables and putting the oven on for ages. There are things, it's not as simple as going vegan, but, you know, broadly that is generally better. So yeah, I think it's not something that we should necessarily be dictating, but trying to understand and incentivize better food production and more awareness of the different types of food and how they contribute.
It's interesting, isn't it, that kind of debate about whether you have to go completely one way or the other, and as you say, if it's about kind of just shifting people's diets, then perhaps we can kind of create that shift and that will gather momentum over time. Anjana, have you got any perspectives on this question of diet and veganism?
Well, I don't eat that much meat, actually, and I talk to young people only yesterday, actually, a group of year 12s, 9 of them, and their perspective on the issue. So if we are talking about what can people do individually, including diet and actions, they were talking about political power and voting. So sorry, Alice, I'm kind of moving away from food, but I think for me, I think I choose to make those choices because I am privileged to do so. So I have a car, I can drive a bit further or go to the shops because I am able to do so. And when I think about those that don't have the privilege or unable to do that, I'm just wondering how we can empower those communities and those families to make the right choices that are beneficial for the planet. And that all comes back to how climate literate are they, so that they do want to choose to make those right choices, and they do choose to shop ethically where they can. And then this comes back to young people, because sometimes the young people in the homes and their communities are the influencers for their parents and vice versa as well. And the young people that I spoke to yesterday, they were deeply frustrated. They were probably about, 15 or 16 years old, and they all said, we don't have a vote. So, what power do we have? Yeah. And what they were saying was, we need to influence our parents. And, what really surprised me was how climate literate they were. So what I did was I talked about historic climate change over 4.5 billion years leading to today. And for those young people, they were, we know this, but how can we make that happen in our community? And that was what they were deeply focused on. So it's almost like you're kind of stuck in a position of, you've got young people quite frustrated that people aren't listening to them. Where is their power? Where is their agency to make a difference? And in their own world, in their own spaces, they make a difference by influencing the people that have the power, their parents who go out and make those choices on their behalf. And then at a later stage, it's kind of when they come to that age of 18, when they can vote, my goodness, they're going to use it.
Thank you very much, Anjana. I mean, we so often think about parents teaching children, families teaching children, but I think we see very often actually children really influencing their parents, their wider communities. And it is interesting, isn't it? Because I think back to my own childhood, and I basically decided I was going to go vegetarian when I was about 15, but I knew it would be impossible at home. And so when I left home at 18, that was it. I became vegetarian, but actually I wasn't empowered to do that before that point. Ben, have you got any opinions on this particular area?
I think it's really important for each of us to do what we can. And anyone who makes a difference, anyone who's working towards an achievable goal, I think deserves commendation there. Not everyone is going to go, regardless whether veganism is right, wrong, whatever. The reality is, not everybody is going to go vegan. So it's appreciating what people can do where they can. And the big thing that's with youngsters in the UK is meat-free Mondays. But it has a huge impact on the environment. Just reducing meat intake once a week has a huge impact. And we're also seeing that schools are teaching kids to teach their parents how you cook alternatively, nice and affordably, but also with different ingredients or with alternative proteins, whatever, affordably. There are ways around this. What I don't like is the narrative, is it right or wrong? What should we do? What shouldn't we do? Should you go veggie? Should you go vegan? I'm a veggie as well. I haven't eaten fish for years, haven't eaten meat for years. But I haven't gone vegan. But I don't feel bad about that because I'm doing what I can at the moment right now. And I think we need to work towards that and actually make others who aren't veggie or vegan or who haven't reduced their intake in any way, shape or form, saying whatever you do will make a difference. And again, it goes back to that empowerment and that sense of you don't have to do everything in order to do something. And like you keep going back to the idea that every single attempt that you make does make a positive difference. And again, it seems I'm banging that drum constantly, but it is as simple as that. You don't have to go vegan or veggie or never fly again in order to make a difference. I think that's a really important point to remember for most people who are considering how to make a change there.
Thanks, Ben. I'm going to introduce another question now into the mix, which really kind of picks up on these ideas of empowerment, empowering people to make choices that they want to make. It comes from Paul McConkey. He says, how can we tell which companies to give our money to and which are just greenwashing? Do we know? I mean, this is surely a problem, isn't it, Mark? I mean, as it becomes more not just acceptable, but actually desirable to look as though you are environmentally friendly, we're going to get some fraudulent claims.
Definitely, and a good rule of thumb is that everyone's greenwashing until proven otherwise. So be very, very skeptical of the claims made in advertising. For example, the oil companies, I think, spend more money advertising the little bits of biofuels and hydrogen and renewables that they do than they do actually developing those things. So it's basically entirely a PR con job, and it's important to keep your eye on the bigger picture, which is that we have to stop using fossil fuels absolutely and entirely, and in the very, very near future. So all of the fossil fuels industry will disappear. And so there's nothing they can do to make themselves look greener, which is in any way going to be persuasive. They are dinosaurs. That's why they're fossil fuels, and they have to be got rid of. Whether BP and Shell can transition themselves into doing something which is compatible with net zero is up to them, but at the moment it's greenwash. I pulled out of the Science Museum climate change talks recently because they were sponsored by Shell. I think I recently heard that the Science Museum has doubled down on accepting more fossil fuel industry funding, which I think is outrageous. Particularly when they're launching a climate change exhibition. So we need to kind of really expose that level of hypocrisy and not do the dirty work for these corporations for them.
Thank you, Mark. Anybody else got any ideas about how to spot greenwashing? How about you, Sarah? I mean, perhaps this is something to do with food labeling as well, is it? Knowing whether the food we're eating really is better from an environmental point of view. How do we know? Yeah,
and I think greenwashing is a step towards something that needs to happen, maybe. I mean, the fact that greenwashing happens shows that there is public concern about these issues, and that there's a step trying to start doing something. But ultimately, for example, on food labeling, I'd love to see climate impacts of all foods written on all packets, and there have been just a few companies that have started to do that. But obviously, for that to actually be transformational, it has to happen on all food packets, not just the ones that are particularly good for the environment, and it has to be done in a standardized way. But on the other hand, the government can't come in necessarily right now and say that is going to be mandatory on all food packets. They might be at a transitionary period where it starts to become demanded by consumers, food producers start to get used to the idea, and it might be a step in the right direction. But yeah, we've got to have it mandated, and we've got to have it regulated in a coherent way for it to be acceptable long term.
Thank you, Sarah. Let's have a look. I've got loads of questions, and I'm trying to spot which ones are covering similar ground.
Sorry, Alice, I'm just going to come in.
Anjana. Yeah, do
Sarah,
come in.
Just picking up on what Sarah said, I think that's really fascinating, because I think they could be doing that for clothing and garments, couldn't they? And I mean, I'm thinking of all the young people that I work with and all those influencers, particularly those who are really against fast fashion and the impacts that has on the environment. Wouldn't it be amazing to go into a store and pick something up and think that's there, it's on the label, and I can see the impact it's having on the climate and the planet when I pick up this lovely top, and I think there are lots of influencers out there that are talking about fast fashion and the impact on the environment. But I just think, transfer whatever you're going to do for food over to clothes, and that is one way of engaging quite a large section of youth and young society. I don't know how you do that.
Wow, yeah, sounds great.
Thank you, Anjana. Right, let's move on to another question. How can we use deliberative democracy approaches, for instance, citizens' assemblies, which are gaining ground and gaining power, to empower young people and indeed people of all ages to get involved in decision making? Anjana, can I come straight back to you on that?
Sure, yeah. I mean, all across the country, there are youth parliaments in different regions, and they are mobilised with young people, voting other young people to represent their voices. And, where we have, areas across the country where young people are mobilizing themselves to do the school strike for climate, that is also a kind of shift in the right direction. But I think it's very, very important to note here is that it's interesting to know who is doing the school strikes for climate, because again, there is a disparity in who it is that is able to do that versus who would love to do that but can't because of various systemic problems within the school system. But certainly, when we look at the landscape for the Agency for Young People to begin to have their voices heard, those youth parliaments are incredibly powerful. And I live in Dorset, and what our youth parliament has done here is they created climate change action packs, which they developed with their own voices, and they had those sent out to every single school in the county. And that made such an impact on just the climate literacy in our communities here. So, just imagine all the youth parliaments across the country being enabled and empowered to do that. So, you're working all the way from early years all the way up to your year 12s, really. I mean, you're causing a revolution and a real surgence in awareness and an understanding of the science. And like we said, children can be the influencers, so they can go back home to their families and they can talk to them about what is happening around them. And a few years ago, I did a talk to a group of geographers in Slough at my old school. These are predominantly young Asian girls. And we know that Black and Asian families just don't engage with nature. They don't engage with the science of climate change. And these girls were telling me, oh, we feel really passionate about this. We go home and we talk to our parents about what we should be doing. And that is a very powerful kind of network to be part of, where you can begin to infiltrate and influence folks that otherwise just are kind of left on the margins of that conversation. Thank you,
Anjana. I mean, Mark, how do you feel about the role of political organisations like citizens' assemblies? Is this where we're going to see growing collective will, but also political pressure as well?
I think they're really interesting, and I think it's great to get more engagement from young people in these kinds of initiatives. But at the same time, they can't be a substitute for fixing democracy. The system is clearly quite broken. People feel very skeptical. I mean, the rise of populist parties in so many different countries is testament to the fact that a lot of people feel very disengaged from politics and are very amenable to kind of populist, anti-elitist, often misinformation and conspiracy theories and stuff. I mean, so we've got to think of how we can try and bring citizens back into the political process in a meaningful way. So citizens' assemblies are great, but it's a small number of people, and it's like I say, you still need to restore some proper, full legitimacy to the democratic process, I think. And there's all sorts of ways that can be done. And the Tory government is moving in exactly the opposite direction with voter ID and some of these things which are intended to restrict democracy. So, we need to keep fighting for our democratic rights, and not put too much thought that alternatives are going to somehow do the job.
Thank you, Mark. Right, moving now from the political back to the agricultural. We've got quite a lot of questions about agriculture and farming. And to represent quite a few of them, I'm going to pick this one from Helen, who says carbon emissions are only part of the equation. Carbon capture is desperately needed. What do the panel think about regenerative agriculture? Is the answer in the soil? It seems very convincing. Sarah, do you want to start with that?
Yes. No, I mean, regenerative agriculture broadly is saying that we are, trying to do good, and we're trying to make the soils better, and that involves also capturing carbon in the soil, which is a major place where it needs to be and can be. So yeah, the thing with the food system is that actually a large fraction of the land that we use for food is used for growing food for animals, and so if we do change the quantities of animals, or the more land intensive foods generally, then we're going to free up land which can be used for other ways of helping to reduce climate change, not just regenerative agriculture. So it's definitely part of the story, but there's actually a really exciting part of the story which involves using land that could be freed up if we do change our diets substantially.
Thank you, Sarah. Mark, I wondered if you could speak to regenerative agriculture.
Yeah, I'd put that a bit more strongly actually than Sarah, although I agree with the main thrust of it, which is that, I mean, the most ecologically productive land is the land which has complete absence of any kind of agriculture. So there's not really much you can do within a rainforest or within a wetland ecosystem to produce food for humans without destroying it. Obviously, there's ways in which, you know, the organic movement and regenerative and agroecological, you know, all of these kinds of ideas can make farming less bad in terms of the kind of model of industrial, monocultural, chemical-dependent farming that we've had since the Second World War. But often there's a yield penalty for doing that, so there's always trade-offs. I think, as Sarah said, if we can get rid of meat and we can get rid of livestock, then we can pretty much free up half of the world's land surface for rewilding and for bringing back these lost ecosystems. And actually, there's a lot of food which can be produced completely with no land at all. There's a company called, I think it's Solar Foods in Finland, you know, and then they make proteins out of hydrogen captured from produced from electrolysis, generated by solar photovoltaic power, and CO2 captured from the atmosphere. So there's no land there at all. You know, there's obviously a few other bits and pieces that you need, chemistry that you need to produce for proteins, but you know, the main feedstocks can be produced without any land at all. And you know, if we move in that direction towards, I think George Monbiot's called this farm-free foods, there's a whole new conversation about sustainability that we're only just beginning to have.
I think that's really interesting, and that actually ties in really nicely with this question that's coming from Charles Bailey. He says, on the question of food production, it's obviously far more benign in climate and conservation terms to grow plants hydroponically and meat in a test tube. But these processes demand industrial scale investment. This will take it out of the hands of the huge agrarian majorities in the developing world and rob them not only of their livelihood, but their whole identity. How are we to manage this adjustment? And you know, that is a really big issue, isn't it? That actually what could end up happening is that essentially wealthy countries investing in this kind of industrial food production are wresting away food sovereignty from producers, and particularly poorer producers in various parts of the world. I don't know. I mean, how do we balance that food sovereignty with the need to produce food more sustainably? Can we balance it?
Where to begin?
It's a difficult question. What do you think, Sarah?
Okay, so I mean, in terms of lab meat and hydroponics, then you know, they are a great way of producing food very hyper locally. So you can have, you know, a supermarket with a hydroponic system in the basement producing, you know, fresh salad and reducing food miles, reducing food waste as well. On the other hand, to produce, you know, a substantial fraction of the food that we eat on this planet that way is not what people are talking about. It's not even, it doesn't add up. So it's not really about to take away the food sovereignty, can't say that word anymore. So yeah, I think it's got a place, and it's got a place in terms of health and increasing the amount of vegetable, you know, fresh vegetable consumption in cities, for example. But I think that, you know, there's so much we can do in terms of just changing the proportion of plant to animal based in our diets that is going to have a much bigger impact than those things, if I'm really honest.
Can I just jump in here? I mean, food sovereignty is and I can say it just about, is a political concept. Food security is a nutritional concept. And I'm actually more interested in the latter. We've got food insecurity still affecting 800-900 million people around the world. Obviously, the vast majority of those are in developing countries. And that's largely because people are trapped in subsistence agriculture, which is very low yielding. As a result of that, are in extreme poverty. So we have to address the poverty issue and the inequalities which give rise to that, and that will then lead to a more food secure world. And I think that's really the most important thing to focus on.
Thank you, Mark. And I think you've also answered another question from Peter Gaskin, which is how can it be possible to achieve everything that's needed if tackling climate change doesn't also address social justice? Isn't the main problem that the sheer number of us means that there is the sheer number of us, but also unfair distribution and consumption of resources. We've got to tackle those things hand in hand, haven't we? So there've got to be holistic approaches to this. Can I ask you to come back on that, Mark?
Hey, I don't want to do too much talking, but I mean, yeah, and justice. The issue of justice has been at the heart of the climate change debate from the year dot. I mean, if you think about it, the vast majority of the climate warming that we're currently experiencing has been caused by industrial countries. So there's a kind of historic climate debt which the rich world owes to the global south. There's no proposals out there yet to monetize that. My proposal actually is that the financial debts of developing countries should be cancelled to make up for the historical debt, carbon debt held by the rich industrialized north. I think there has to be some dimension of justice brought into this. Otherwise, it's going to be seen as fundamentally unfair and it is fundamentally unfair that the global north has achieved development and mass consumerist prosperity on the back of fossil fuels, while then turning around to the global south and saying, you're going to have to do this differently. We've used up all the carbon space. You know, you're not allowed to burn coal, oil, and gas. So there is no carbon budget left if we're going to stay on 1.5, which we've all agreed on. So the industrialized countries have to then pay for the zero carbon transition and the achievements of economic prosperity in the south. They can't, we can't solve the climate change issue by keeping the developing world poor.
Thank you very much, Mark. Somebody says, what's the thought amongst you? She's called Linda Green, says, what's the thought amongst you about population control? Too many people on Earth. There are too many of us, but I don't think we should start culling anybody just yet. And there are some really kind of positive responses to this. My response is always that if you are worried about growing population, then we know that in developed countries where women are educated, the reproductive rate goes down. So if you want to make sure that that the population doesn't keep increasing, give aid to developing countries and to charities which focus on women's education, on girls' education. Somebody, Tony H is called, says, do you all accept Anjana's comment that climate change has always happened, that the climate would be warming even if we weren't here? I'm not sure that's what Anjana said, but that we have an overwhelming duty to reduce our part in it while preparing for the inevitable change. Shouldn't we plan for change and be honest with our children about what we cause and what science says nature causes? Well, I don't think there's any debate now about the fact that we're looking at anthropogenic climate change. But should we just be adapting, Ben?
So, I'm not going to speak for Anjana because I know what Anjana's going to say, but I definitely want you to join in a second, Anjana. We are going through cyclical climate change that we have seen for hundreds of millions and indeed billions of years. There is no question that we are going through a cycle right now, and it does this. Sometimes it's absolutely bloody freezing. You go to the Endordovichian 400 and something million years ago, and we were talking kilometer high glaciation sheets over the land around the Earth. And then we had things like the Central Atlantic Magmatic Province that pumped out huge amounts of noxious gas and completely increased the temperature of the Earth. And we lost 96% of life on Earth. So we've gone through these absolutely terrible shifts and cataclysmic changes throughout Earth's history. However, we are now going through a period that is warming. That's different to say, as it's warming, there's a hell of a spike within that trend. And within this cyclical thing that we've seen for the last several 100,000 years, pretty much since the last, and you'll know more than me, Angela, that since the Pliocene, we've seen this cyclical change. And suddenly the last 200 years or so, it is rocketing up. So that debate that I thought we're going through a warming period anyway, yes. But it doesn't mean what we're going through is part of that warming period.
I think that's wrong. I think we're going through a cooling period actually. The trend in the Holocene up until the Anthropocene is cooling. So I don't think there's any component of the current day warming which is not anthropogenic. That's my understanding of the scientific consensus at the moment. And Anjana, maybe you might disagree.
I'm actually with Ben on this. My assumption was, or my understanding was, we were warming. But what's happening is that the warming is accelerated because of anthropogenic activity. So, yeah, sorry, Mark, that sounds really bad. But yeah, I'm with Ben on this one because my understanding was we are warming. And I think it's really interesting that point made, because I think we have to be absolutely crystal clear that climate has changed, as Ben has said, for billions of years, and it's down to our actions in the last 150 years or so that has escalated that rise in temperature, and that nature just has not had the time to adjust and evolve where it has done in the past. So, you know, for example, you know, these ammonites, and this is this lovely book, if you haven't got it, that's Ben's book. So you can read all about how creatures evolved and adapted over hundreds of millions of years in response to changes in climate, in response to, you know, chemicals in the atmosphere and all sorts of things like that. Just not giving nature a chance. And I think that's the critical point, isn't it?
I mean, there have been periods where we've had very dramatic climate changes where, you know, Ben's series of books will be largely based on that, with you know, whole rafts of animals going extinct because of those climate changes. I suppose what we don't want is for humans to be responsible for the 6th major global extinction, and it looks like we are.
If you look at the 5 other big mass extinctions in the geological record, they're probably climate related, except maybe for the end Cretaceous meteor strike. But you know, what's really fascinating and really struck me from looking at paleoclimate right back to, you know, for the last 500 million years, is that we're probably releasing carbon into the atmosphere at least an order of magnitude faster, so 10 times faster than happened naturally, even during the most extreme volcanic episodes, which led to the great mass extinctions such as that at the end of the Permian. So, you know, if we carry on doing what we're doing, it will be an experiment which is unprecedented during the whole history of complex life on Earth, and that's quite something.
Thank you. There's some really interesting political and philosophical questions here. Lots of questions about veganism. Some people being very depressed that they have to go vegan. They've got medical reasons why they can't do that. But I think that we've said nobody should be feeling depressed about that. Nobody should feel guilty. Every little helps. And other people saying that, you know, a vegan world sounds wonderful, but is it doable? Well, it's perfectly doable from a human health perspective. I get very frustrated as a biological anthropologist when people say to me, "Why are you vegetarian? You've got the teeth of a meat eater." I wonder if you could elaborate on why we haven't got the teeth of a meat eater, Ben?
Absolutely. And just to hopefully to finalize, I've just seen David Love has asked a question there that we would be in a cooling period. We were in a cooling period of about the last 2,000 years, but over the whole Holocene, we are still in a warming period. If you look at the wider trend, that we are from a wider perspective, in a warming period anyway. But that's not, again, to say that this massive spike isn't part of that. And I think if we lose that narrative there, we're confusing ourselves. So the science says that overall we have been in a warming period for the last 10, 20, 30,000 years now. In terms of our evolution, Alice, the teeth, yes, we have these wonderful little carnivorous, tiny little canines there, but so do mandrills, which eat bloody
I was going to say they're not.
bacon.
They're no good for, you know, they're teeny tiny. They're absolutely
Alice,
minute.
You and I go for walks occasionally, and I've never seen you able to chase down a deer and tear it to pieces with your canines. They're not the best canines. I'm just going to put it out there. Yes, we have evolved as omnivores, which means we're able to eat a range of different things, from nuts to seeds to meat. We're specialist generalists, aren't we?
Yeah.
So we've completely been jack of all trades. Just because we can do something doesn't mean we should. I think that's the evolutionary answer there.
Well, I think our evolutionary biology actually puts us in this wonderful position of allowing us to choose. You know, that's what's brilliant about it, is that actually we can choose to be completely vegetarian and to be completely vegan. And actually, a lot of studies show be a lot healthier than if we're eating too much meat. But yeah, I mean, if you're an alien coming to look at the planet and there were no humans left alive and all you had left were their teeth to see, you know, to try and work out what they ate, you'd probably decide they ate fruit. I mean, we've got the teeth and the guts of a very generalist fruit-eating ape. I think Ben's got a bit on there to get some bones and some teeth. So while he's gone to do that, Ken Bone's got more of a statement than what is it?
That is a herbivore. That is a mandrill that was from a zoo for about 100 years ago. Those things are purely for showing off. Just because you have big teeth doesn't mean you need to tear things apart.
Yeah, and we don't have those anyway, do we?
No.
Yeah, so Ken Bones says thank you very much, the Mandrill. I'm gonna show you my macaque. His canines have fallen out, so he's not terribly impressive. Ken Bones says the gas and oil industry hold large corporate and political power. The momentum for renewables is moving in the right direction, but current building policies are still allowing poor, inefficient house building. So he's very much talking about here in the UK, still with fossil fuel boilers. Our fellow European cousins were using community district type renewable systems back in the 1980s. Are we just a bit slow, Mark?
We are very slow, and the government, I think, just cancelled the Green Homes scheme, which was supposed to be getting rid of people's boilers and replacing them with zero carbon options like heat pumps. District heating makes a lot of sense for densely populated urban areas, but you need to have a heat source. And if we're closing down power stations because they're all fossil fueled, then that doesn't really work unless you're going for nuclear, which is quite unpopular. I'm in a rural area, everyone's burning oil, and it's incredibly carbon intensive. The previous owners of this house calculated they were emitting 20 tons of CO2 every year just through heating a big old house with oil. So, we're about to replace it with an air source heat pump, but it's going to cost, I don't know, 10, 15,000 pounds, and that's out of just about every normal people's budgets. So there has to be, not just government subsidy, but this has to be a government mandated transition. It's a bit like the end of selling fossil fuel vehicles. There has to be an end to burning fossil fuels in the domestic environment too, and that has to be government supported.
Again, it's that same question, isn't it? Well, that's that same issue about government helping us to make the right choices and supporting us to make the right choices. Karen Park says, I was really interested in what Anjana was saying about her parents living in a sustainable way, but moving away from that. I understand that commercial production makes products cheaper. What does the panel think about the feasibility of pricing for externalities? And actually, there was another question that was about is actually capitalism at all compatible with reducing our impact when it comes to climate change? So what does the panel think about the feasibility of pricing for externalities, i.e. reflecting wider environmental impacts in the price of commercially produced goods? Is that something that we should be doing? Should there be an extra tariff on all sorts of goods from food to clothing, depending on their environmental impact?
The question there is whether that would actually work. So you need to then study, well, if you increase the price of certain foods, how much do you have to increase it before people reduce the consumption of them? There have been some studies on this which do suggest that would be effective. There's also, big issues around food in terms of, that we've all got to eat, and if we start making things more expensive, then that's going to be again a sort of an ethical issue. So it doesn't have to be just about taxing climate impacts, for example. It can also be about subsidizing the things which are really healthy and low impact to make those foods more accessible. So yeah, I for lack of imagination, I can't think of, I think it's got to involve prices somewhere, whether that's something that's very visible to the consumer or whether it's more behind the scenes in terms of reducing subsidies for one thing and increasing subsidies for another. I don't know which is best there.
Yeah, I think issues like that have come to the fore with the COVID pandemic as well, which I wasn't going to mention, but I have to, because certainly behavioural psychologists like Stephen Reischer have said that we're going about things completely the wrong way if we're threatening people with fines rather than trying to incentivize and create the environment for the right choices around COVID. And it's exactly the same. And COVID has brought out inequalities in our society. It has deepened inequalities in our society. Climate change is going to do exactly the same. And this brings me on to Sarah Jones's question. She says, I work with people who live in poverty, and taking positive climate action feels out of reach for many because their choices are so limited. For instance, buying processed food in plastic packaging because of affordability, poor housing with inefficient heating, etc. They also feel that everyday lives are challenging enough, and thinking about protecting the environment feels unrealistic. How do we support those in society who live with very low incomes or live in poverty and enable them to make a difference? Anjana.
Yeah, that's a really difficult one. And I was talking about this exact issue earlier in the day, and particularly about the disparity of access for deprived communities to nature. So they feel that connection and that ownership. It's a tricky one, because families like the person who's posted this question are often reliant on food banks and that generosity that the more privileged can provide via that process. I think at the end of the day, just to echo what Ben said, is whatever you're doing, as small as it may seem, is sometimes it's enough, and you have to be kind to yourself. So, for example, I was trawling through Twitter today and I saw an activity being done at a school, actually, and this is really interesting because this relates to what you said about food miles. Children were looking at a bag of, they had apples in the classroom, and the teacher had basically got a paper plate and chopped the different apples up, and she'd put segments of the apples on the plate. Some of the apples were as far from Chile and some were from the UK, and then the children had to do a taste test, and they looked at the carbon miles associated with that apple, how much it cost. And then the children were realizing, actually, yeah, this apple from Chile tastes the same as the one from the UK, and the one from the UK, is less impact on the environment, it costs less. And it kind of comes down again to families kind of working together and harnessing that knowledge so they feel empowered to make those right choices. So, for example, if supermarkets can work harder to support local producers and local growers, and of course Sarah will know far more about this than I do, but it's then empowering those producers and getting that produce into the shops. So the carers and the parents that are providing food for their families can make those informed choices. It's all about being informed and empowered and doing what we can do within reason. And I think one of the really big people that I follow on Twitter is Jack Monroe, and she produces recipes for folks, living in food poverty. And I find her narratives quite interesting about how families do feed themselves on in very difficult circumstances. And so personally, I think, supermarkets and producers need to work with people like Jack Monroe to understand what those lives are like for those families and how they can make produce available that is far more sustainable. I hope that makes sense. I don't know if that was a roundabout way of saying. Sarah might be able to come in on that.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think that, definitely, empowerment is very important, and empowerment to make a statement and make a difference collectively as well. And I was just thinking about the particular audience that are on this this evening. It's quite a select group of people who have taken the time to come to an event like this in an evening. And I'm just reminded of when I'm sometimes at science festivals and I get somebody coming and saying, well, I'm vegan, I batch cook everything once a week, and then I do all these things. What else can I do? And they want me to tell them, some other thing that they can change in their diets. And what I usually say to them is, you're probably already, eating, your climate impact of your food might already be like, half or 1/3 of the average. And, cutting, even more off that is going to have a much smaller effect on the climate than going out and finding other people and getting them to reduce their climate impacts by 10%. So I just wanted to sort of, every little is will have a little effect, but at the same time, sometimes, actually choosing to work collectively as a group, for example, to make a real difference might be more important than becoming a complete hermit and growing all your own food.
And linking on to that, there was a question from John Dobson, who said he was 80 and didn't have much money, and what can he do to help? And also linking on to what you just said then, Sarah, Mary had said, aren't we doing a little bit of an echo chamber? I think we run that risk a little bit as well. As you said, we need to push that narrative further out there. And if you think you're doing almost everything you can, but you want to do that one little thing, but you really like having cheese every so often, don't give up cheese. If that's what your one passion in life, no one's asking you to live for the next 50 years miserably if that makes you miserable. Spreading that word and talking to others is just as effective as as changing your diet. It really is, as you say, making the differences you can make, whether you can afford to do it, whether you're feasibly able to do it. If you live in an old house that you physically can't heat, or you've got medication that you can't change X, Y, or Z, then spread the word. Because as you said, we spend our lifetimes, we have all given our time tonight to try and spread the word to you lot, but the very fact you guys are here, the 500 or so, is wonderful, but we know you're already engaged. How do we engage those people who have no way to connect with this sort of chat, or worse, who don't give a shit, who just want to go about their daily life and really not make the change? They're the ones we need to target. I mean, I always joke with Alice and others that when I do my BBC4 stuff, I don't tell my neighbours and my family, because I know they're already going to watch BBC4 because they're my absolute target audience. How do we spread this to those non-target audiences? And I'm not saying we go out to the masses and try and make millions of extra vegans tomorrow, but how do we spread that word a little bit to get them to engage? How do we get them to care? And I think that's something we can all do. So if you're sitting there at the end of tonight thinking, I already do X, Y, and Z, what else can I do? Spreading that word, spreading that love, making people realize and giving them the opportunity to talk to you, or to go and find out for themselves, or helping capacity build them, is really powerful. I think that should be remembered as well.
Sorry, Ben, I'm just, sorry, Alice.
I was just going to bring you in, Anjana, actually.
This really awkward moment, school gate moment, super awkward. So there's one of the parents at the school that my daughter goes to, and once we had this conversation about beeswax wraps, and I said, oh, I've wrapped my daughter's sandwiches in beeswax wraps, so we don't use cling film or cellophane. I said, oh, I don't agree with those, because the bees are under stress when you take the beeswax, and we had this kind of conversation. I thought, okay, fair enough, maybe I should look at vegan beeswax wraps, and I felt terribly guilty about it all. Anyway, fast forward to today, and she was having a conversation with me about her garden and how she'd landscaped it. And she said, oh yeah, we've replaced all the grass with AstroTurf because the clay was a nightmare, and we were just slipping all over it in the winter. And I didn't have any, at that point I could have said, yes, but I thought you were a huge supporter of bees and, as pollinators and all this kind of stuff. And I was just at a point where I just didn't have the energy to approach her and talk to her gently about why that was such a disastrous idea to put plastic grass in your garden in the lead up to summer. And it is, I guess for the audience, it's like when you hear those, when you're in a conversation like that, and possibly not where I was this morning, but if you are able to talk to people and gently, help them to consider their actions and their choices in a way that doesn't sound condescending or accusational, I think that's something that we can do every day. Like, oh, wow, did you know that AstroTurf is a reduction in, actually you're cutting nature out of your garden, aren't you? I don't know if anybody else has experience of things like that.
I think you're right. And on that note, it becomes really easy for any of us. I've done it. I know I've done it, where you suddenly become really rabid and you just go, AstroTurf, what the hell are you thinking? What's wrong with you? I think it's much better to go, I completely get why you've done it. I don't agree with that. What would be great is if you could offset a little bit of that and support your local wildlife trust, or do a little bit of this, or do some replanting somewhere else. And even that, when you think they've been an absolute, complete muppet, we've still got to have that narrative. That again is that connection, because the moment it's not us and them. It's not us against China, or it's not us against the politicians. It's not you against me. We've all got to do it. There's no question about this. That there is absolutely no way. So frustrating as it is, we have to find ways to engage on all that level. It's not
judging, is it? We can't judge. We just, like you say, if I had thought about it clearly, I said, oh, so if you've got AstroTurf, you might want to put a few planters out with some lavender or something like that, because that will just be lovely and that will bring, wildlife in. But I think I was just too stunned at the time.
But ultimately, we are good at this collective stuff. I mean, the thing which gives me grounds for optimism, and it's been great to hear some optimistic perspectives tonight. And I hope that is one of the kind of take-home messages, or the take-home feelings of tonight, that we can do something, and that there is grounds for optimism, and that we have actually done quite a bit in the period of time since I first met you, Mark. We are humans with this capacity for working collectively and for collaborating with each other. I see one of the hallmarks of humans as being effective collaboration. I think that's how a relatively puny African ape has become so successful and actually is now a victim of its own success. I'm going to bring this discussion to a close. Thank you all so much. Thank you everybody who's joined us for tonight's discussion and this launch of Humanist Climate Action. Thank you for all the questions, and I'm sorry we didn't get to answer them all, but hopefully some of your questions will have been rolled into answers to other people's questions. And I'm sure that everybody watching will be virtually joining with me to thank our fantastic panel, Mark Linus, Anjana Khatwa, Ben Garrod, and Sarah Bridle. Thank you all so much for sharing your expertise this evening, but also for all the work you're doing to help raise awareness, to look for solutions, and to bring people together to work on this huge challenge for all of humanity, for so many other species as well that we share this wonderful planet with. So I hope everyone has enjoyed this evening. I hope it's been insightful and energizing. Humanist Climate Action is recruiting new members, and I also hope you might consider joining. So if you visit humanist.uk/climate or simply search for Humanist Climate on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram, you can find out more and join there. And signing up will also connect you with other humanists taking action on climate change, but also connect you with Humanist UK's important work for a kinder, more rational society focused on other issues as well, like human rights and a secular state. And that's, of course, if you're not already part of Humanist UK. Thank you again to all our panelists, and thank you everybody for coming along this evening. Until we meet again, stay safe, keep well. Thank you and good night.